Hey everyone, it's Types, and today I'm talking about one of the coolest mechanics in the Pokemon TCG that we don't currently have in Standard, but is one that, maybe we will see return soon. Um, I'd say there's a chance we do, and it's a really cool mechanic, and I really wanted to talk about it in today's video. This is definitely something that I've heard from a lot of other people they kind of want back as well, because it adds some new stuff to the game. It's not some completely game-changing mechanic, but it definitely is pretty cool. And that mechanic, as you can see here, is the Lost Zone. The Lost Zone is a mechanic that actually, if I look at a card that says, that uses the Lost Zone, like this Absol here, it just says put a random card to your opponent's hand in the Lost Zone. So it doesn't really say what the Lost Zone is if you aren't familiar. So I'll actually pull it up in the official or rule book, which also doesn't say very much what it is here. It says Lost Zones is a unique zone that's considered out of play. And if you didn't know, there are different zones in the Pokemon TCG. I believe that is the term for your discard and your bench and things like that. But anyways, there's some different zones. Or I guess in play is going to be one of the zones there. But anyways, so this is not in play, obviously. Cards can be sent to the Lost Zone in many ways, such as through effects of attacks, abilities, or trainer cards. And then, unlike the discard pile, any cards sent to the Lost Zone cannot be recovered and are no longer playable during that game. So, it compares it to the discard pile here, and specifically in contrast, you can't get the cards back, and generally can't interact with them too much. We've seen the Lost Zone 4 times in the history of the Pokemon TCG. Being completely honest, I'm, unsurprisingly, most familiar with the most recent iteration. Also, I guess probably not too surprisingly, the most recent iteration has had the most depth, and looking back, it's had less and less depth. There, I will be talking about the different iterations of Lost Zone a little bit. I don't know if iteration is quite the right word, but different eras there. In terms of the Lost Zone, if we look at other stuff, and this is the official rules, which is kind of useful, but it's a little confusing as well. It also mentions the Prism Star cards, which we will talk about later. Then here it says that they are no longer playable during the game, and then you put them face up anywhere out of play. Also, the Lost Zone is hold on, let me find a card here. So there are each player has a separate Lost Zone, and this is important in with a card like Cramorant or something, which we'll talk about that card and a handful of other specific cards, but they are separate for each player. Though, again, you don't really interact with them. As I said, some things interact a little bit, so I'll just quickly mention those cards, as in interact once they're already in the Lost Zone. But again, normally it's going to be treated like a more permanent discard. But if you look at a card like Kermit here, this counts the number of cards in the Lost Zone. And Mew, which is actually a really sick card also. One thing that's bad about this card, well, two things. One, it's a Pokemon Prime. It's like Mew Prime, but it's not really a mechanic. As far as I'm aware, it's just good cards. There's a handful of different Prime Pokemon. I think there's Mega and Donphan, and those are both pretty good. And Mew, same idea. It's kind of a good card, but it functions as a regular Pokemon. So it's this pseudo mechanic. But when I say pseudo mechanic, it's not really a mechanic at all. But that's kind of weird. I know some people really like them. But anyways, we could have mentioned that there. And also, it's really hard to read the name of this Pokemon on this card for whatever reason. But anyways, have the Pokemon power, or I guess Pokebody, which is a Pokemon power technically, saying that Mew can use the attacks of all Pokemon in the Lost Zone. This is both yours and your opponent's. So I believe the older ones interacted more, potentially with your opponent's Lost Zone, I guess. I don't really know super well. I'm not gonna lie. But this is, I believe. I correct you if I'm wrong in the comment section, but the only card that interacts with the like I guess with the Lost Zone, the actual cards in the Lost Zone, as in it cares what the cards are. Obviously, the different Pokemon give different attacks and do different things for Mew. Unlike with say Cramorant, which kind of interacts with it with the number, but doesn't actually care what those cards are at all. And then there are also cards, as I said, because it's a discard pile. You'll see something like, for example, Lost Vacuum, or honestly just a bunch of I think all of these earlier Pokemon, they this one on a coin flip, or on some coin flips, you can mill the top cards of your opponent's deck into the Lost Zone, not discarding them there, so that's going to be a little worse than putting them into the discard. Sometimes putting in your opponent's discard can help them. Putting it into the Lost Zone almost certainly will not help them there. And then with Lost Vacuum here, you put a card from your own hand into the Lost Zone, which again, going to be worse than discard pile. You can't get it back. That's not the biggest downside, but then in terms of your opponent, you put a Stadium or Tool from your opponent's Pokemon into the Lost Zone, so they can't get that card back as well, which is interesting. There's also not too much recovery of that. You'll also see like Lost Remover, which is like Enhanced Hammer, putting a special energy from your opponent's Pokemon into the Lost Zone, so they can't recover that. Again, it's like kind of hard to recover special energies, so functionally this card works pretty similarly to Enhanced Hammer, but you're going to see these kinds of cards that remove your opponent's cards in some form or another, putting them into the Lost Zone being the most common use of the Lost Zone, which is fine if you're looking at it with something like, say, I guess I'll talk about this. Ampharos. This card's really cool, in my opinion. I guess I have a huge soft spot for it. I believe the first or second video on my channel, I partially feature this in a GLC deck. It's not super good, and it is a fun card though. It was kind of good and themed. But anyways, what it does is with the ability Unseen Flash, you can put 2 energies from your hand, 2 lightning energies from your hand into the Lost Zone. If you do, your opponent's active is now paralyzed. This effect is like fine. I guess it's not that good, but it's a pretty cool ability here. Obviously, putting like having energies to ditch isn't too hard to do, but if you want to use this repeatedly, you can run out of energies, and you can't get those energies back with something like energy retrieval or superior energy retrieval, unlike something like, I'll just say Gholdengo EX, a deck that you're binning energies, you're discarding them. Obviously, the deck's not in standard, so it's not the best example. I mean, none of these cards that we're actually talking about here are in standard, though, so it's fine. But with that, you're looking at recycling energies back into your deck, into your hand, especially there, and you can't do that with Ampharos. So that is definitely a difference. You'll see a handful of different Pokemon putting energies into the Lost Zone. Delphox, we would be doing that. You can see, let's see, Blacephalon GX and Magnezone. Also, by the way, this is really interesting. Both of these cards were good, Magnezone and Blacephalon GX, and they have the same attack here, essentially putting as many energies from your Pokemon as you like into the Lost Zone, and we're both good in very different eras. So that's pretty interesting to see there, and definitely something that I could see a callback to if we do get the Lost Zone returning. I guess I will mention I've heard some people talk about the Lost Zone potentially returning in like Abyss Eye or something like that, which is Pitch Black. Those are like the same expansion there. The one's the Japanese, the one's the international one. I think I switched the order there, but it doesn't, really matter. And with that, I don't know. Some people, I think, just kind of thought that maybe it would return. I don't think there's actually any specific reason for that, as far as I'm aware, other than people just kind of want it because it's kind of cool. And I mean, this set sounds cool. Lost Zone sounds kind of cool. I feel like vibe-wise, kind of similar there. But anyways, we don't have any super concrete reasoning for that, but it would be cool to see. And when we've seen, I guess I should talk about it. So we saw it in, was this Diamond Pearl, in like Platinum here. I'm pretty sure that is Diamond Pearl. And then you're looking at, we just saw a handful of cards there. Then we saw some more in Heart Gold Soul Silver. This was, I'll just say, this wasn't like too far after. When was this set? This set was in, and here it's in 2009. Yeah, so you're gonna see it in like that era, though I'm pretty sure they are, I would say, like slightly different um eras. I don't know exactly when these sets released. I know they were pretty close. Yeah, like a year apart there. And then you look at it in the expanded era. This is actually in live. You can play with some of these cards. I guess I'll mention Draft Rig is pretty good. Honestly, a handful of these cards are pretty good. And this would be during the late, or the like mid Sun and Moon era there. And then you're gonna see it in the mid Sword and Shield era, or wait, no, in the late Sword and Shield era with the Lost Zone here. Again, the late Sword and Shield era or the Sword and Shield one, and then the Sun and Moon one both have pretty fleshed out Lost Zone stuff. The Lost Zone stuff, as far as I'm aware from Heart Gold Soul Silver, was not super good. I don't know if this Gengar was really good at all. I know, or like this Stadium Lost World, which actually can instantly win you the game if your opponent has 6 or more Pokemon in the Lost Zone. It's kind of funny, though I don't think it's super good. But you look at the Lost March attack here. This is, I don't know if it's a callback to Night March. It like kind of feels like it is, though it doesn't actually function particularly similarly to Night March. But again, naming it is pretty similar there. And this is for 2 colors, so you're going to be doing 20 for each of your Pokemon in the Lost Zone, except for Prism Stars, which we will actually talk about. And this allows you to, do damage based on Pokemon in there. You can kind of chuck them in there. You'll see Lost March as a deck where you have the Skiploom and Jumpluff Drumbeak, and Nadu, as well as Lost Blender, making up this Lost March deck. Pretty much you're just trying to put a bunch of Pokemon in the Lost Zone. It's not that complicated. It's, a kind of normal single prize deck, kind of gimmicky a little, pretty decent for a gimmick deck there. And yeah, definitely pretty cool, I suppose. Not crazy depth, but definitely interesting. And you can honestly play this deck in live expand as well if you want. It's kind of cool. I haven't played it. I'm actually not sure. I might have, but it's definitely kind of cool there. And one of the earlier Lost Zone archetypes, and like really the Lost Zone archetype of the Sun Moon era. Moving on to the Sword and Shield era, we see that have the Lost Zone archetype focused around a handful of different cards. You have Cramorant, which if you have 4 more cards in the Lost Zone, attacks are free doing 110. You have Mirage Gate. If you have 7 or more cards in the Lost Zone, accelerates 2 energies of basic types from your deck to your Pokemon in any way you like. It's like a better Crispin, though you do need, again, those 7 cards in the Lost Zone. And then you look at Sableye here. Sableye is, I guess, the finisher in the deck. This one does... It puts 12 damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon and really like that's twice as many as you're spreading with Dragapult. Can hit the active. Obviously, Dragapult EX also does big active damage. These cards are kind of sort of similar. They're not super similar, but this is like a big end game finishing attack. There was also Giratina V-Star as a focus there. Your closest Experiment, Comfy, and some other cards there. I guess Lost Vacuum could be chucked into that discussion there, and those are going to allow you to pretty much just put your own cards in the Lost Zone. They do some other things. Lost Vacuum, I mentioned that card earlier, just being a way to remove your opponent's Pokemon there. This deck was definitely pretty fleshed out and a pretty good deck for quite a while. I wouldn't say a broken deck, but I'd say one of the top decks of the era, and pretty versatile in terms of how you could play it. I suppose you're going to look at a handful of different decks there. You'll also look at Pokemon like, I say, Aerodactyl, V-Star, Giratina V-Star to some extent as well. Rotom V is certainly a very good card. There's actually 2 of them if you didn't know that interact with the Lost Zone, but the one with the ability there. You can look at a card like even Delphox V maybe might fit that description. Looking at older cards, you might see some, I guess, like Faba or Girafarig, kind of interacting with the Lost Zone, but not being these like Lost Zone deck cards. So you see that some, you don't see it an absolute ton though, but definitely something interesting there. The Lost Zone is added 2 different cards and adds some more depth to the game, interacting a little differently than the Discard Pile. As I said, we'll talk about Prism Stars, which also interact with the Lost Zone in a different way. I don't know if I do like the design of the Prism Stars. I was actually considering making this video just about Prism Stars, but I wanted to talk about the Lost Zone as a whole. And ultimately, it's pretty cool with some fun archetypes. I'd say the Lost Zone as a mechanic is kind of cool, interacting with the Pokemon TCG in a way similar to the Discard Pile, but a little differently as well, and I think definitely fits pretty well within the game. But then once we see the actual implementation, I think it's done really well on top of that. Then looking at Prism Star cards here, Prism Star cards are a mechanic. Prism Star cards are either Pokemon or not Pokemon. I was going to say Pokemon or trainers. So you got some stadiums, you got some supporters, and you have some special energies there. And then, of course, Pokemon. That Pokemon Prism Star is actually the only Prism Star that directly refers to the Lost Zone, putting itself into the Lost Zone. But the reason for this is you can see this Prism Star rule. By the way, these are rule box Pokemon. They are not multi-prize Pokemon. They are all one-prizers, but have this ability here, which again puts it into the Lost Zone, but you have the rule which says you can't have more than 1 Prism Star card with the same name in your deck, as opposed to, you can have 4 Tapu Kogas, you can have 1 Tapu Koga Prism Star in a deck there. And this is not 1 Prism Star in total, though. You can have as many Prism Star cards as you want. And if a Prism Star card would go to the discard pile, instead put in the Lost Zone. This one doesn't go to the discard. It could just say discard itself, and then it would just get Lost Zone. So that's kind of interesting how they chose to word it. But anyways, in terms of how good these cards were, I would say they are probably pretty balanced, balanced competitively. Tapu Koko Prism Star, honestly, quite powerful. I'm not gonna lie, but certainly very a good card. But it enabled some cool things. And I don't think. I mean, I will say Lightning was pretty good when Tapu Koko Prism Star was around, and also it's a pretty good card and expanded as far as I'm aware. But definitely, it's not like an auto include. I will say a lot of them are not super specific, but not super niche either. They are, sorry, not super specific or super general there. So you'll see some decks playing Prism Stars, some decks playing multiple Prism Stars. You can put them all in your deck if you want, and then they do go to the Lost Zone after use. And so with trainers, or sorry, with specifically supporters, we don't have any items, but if we did, they'd work the same way. They are one-time use. Obviously, supporters sometimes you can recover, but you can't recover them here. I guess Cyrus Prism Star. There's actually only 3 of them, or there's only 4 of them. They're pretty powerful at some point. Cyrus Prism Star was like the focal point of a deck, but it is going to be a one-time use thing that can be swingy in a similar way to Ace Specs, but I would say it feels a little more fair than the Ace Specs, which feel like sometimes like I don't know if random swings, but really, really substantial swings at times, which don't feel super fun. I'd say Prism Stars feel a little more fair there, being a little less restrictive than Ace Specs, where you're only playing one Ace Spec in a deck. You're playing one Ace Spec in every single deck in the game because even the worst ones are better than an average card, ignoring the fact that they're an Ace Spec. So you should play if you don't have assuming you have an Ace Spec, you should play it, right? It's very, very good. Prism Stars are not like that. Some decks, you probably should definitely play 1 or 2 of the Prism Stars, but they are going to feel not as crazy as the Ace Specs can at times, and also are more searchable as well. Generally, you're going to see them on, like even supporters compared to items are going to be more searchable, more recoverable. I guess not recoverable because you can't recover them, but more interactable in a more fun way. And also, you're using one supporter, so you're not going to get hit by like boss Iono or like something like that in the same turn, which you could with Iono's not standard, but you get the idea. You could get hit by Iono and Prime Catcher, or by Unfair Stamp and Boss, which is not what you'll find with the Prism Stars here. And also, I will say the spores are all pretty niche. Then you have the stadiums. These are kind of cool. I'd say more solid value is more where I'd put them in. They are nice, powerful cards, but they are feeling more fair. I'd say probably more fair, or I guess less swingy than the Ace Spec stadiums there as well. Again, they're going to be a little more tame. Not that I have a huge issue with Prism Stars, or sorry, with Ace Specs. I think Ace Specs as a mechanic are kind of cool, but I think Prism Stars are a little cooler. Look at the Pokemon. Again, they are going to be more type specific, I would say, and deck specific, but definitely fun. Some can be tax. There was a deck called Zacian with Jirachi Prism Star, which was a fun deck with like a unique play pattern there. You can see some as like finishers. You can see some as tax. Different things like that. Ultimately, these cards are cool as well. They are one-ofs, but they're not recoverable, so even if you have one as a tech in a matchup, it's not something you're using over and over again. Also, they do go to the Lost Zone, again, making them not recoverable, but they do actually go to the Lost Zone, interacting with the Lost Zone cards in a somewhat interesting way. They didn't really interact with the Lost Zone cards of this same era that they were in, but if you look at the older or the newer Lost Zone cards from, not the Sun and Moon era, the Prism Stars actually interact with them in a somewhat interesting way, somewhat chaotic way, but I think it is really fun. It's something I haven't really messed around with in like Live Expanded. If anyone wants to see me play a Lost Zone deck in Live Expanded, I actually wouldn't mind doing that, though I definitely don't. It could definitely be a little complicated / weird there, but they are pretty fun. Ultimately, I think the balance of these cards as well, I think pretty much all of them are pretty fun and pretty cool. I don't really have an issue with, I don't think any of them. They're not all perfect. I guess I will say as well, Ditto Prism Star. Ditto Prism Star is, I don't know if this is a crazy take. I don't think this is a crazy take. It's one of the best design cards ever, potentially, with its ability, Almighty Evolution. Once during your turn, say once in your turn. Like, I don't know. But anyways, so you can put any stage 1 from your hand onto this Pokemon to evolve it. You can't use this ability turn 1 on the turn this Pokemon was put into play. Pretty much this is a basic to any stage 1. This allows you to have more consistency within your deck, but it is still a liability. It has an ability, and obviously, so if that gets turned off, you can evolve it. And then also, more importantly, I would say in terms of like the general design of this card, it's low HP, right? So it's going to be a liability in that regard, and also doesn't even have an attack there. So it can be a card that allows you to fix your evolution lines, though. If we look at this deck here, see it's running Electro GX, which you need in play, as well as Raichu. This smooths things out. So it's running a 2-3 Electrode line and a 1-2 Raichu line, or a lone Raichu there. But then the Ditto Prism kind of fixes that line into a more normal evolution line there. And that, I think, is really cool. again, you see like the ability lock stuff with left key, you could theoretically turn the ability off for yourself, and there's a lot of interesting back and forths there. It's not something that is super crazy, but I definitely think it's really fun. And when I hear people talk about like Cube, that format where you're, making specifically making the cube there. This is a card that always gets brought up, I think, and when people talk about cooler older cards, people always talk about this card. It's a really awesome, I think, a card that really so many people would love to see. It's a card that enables some interesting deck building as well. It allows you to have kind of more space, allows you to put in more text. It really just makes deck building a lot more fun, but is not a card that feels broken either. So just a really awesome card that I'd love to see, and I'm sure a lot of people would as well. It's kind of like, fixing evolution stuff. It's kind of like something that then Force Vitality does, help you smooth things out, but Force Vitality doesn't really smooth things out. It can, or it can make things more chaotic there, and more high rolly, but with Ditto Prism Star, it's going to really smooth things out a lot. So just really wanted to talk about that card. In terms of looking at these others, I mentioned a few specifics, but for the most part, they're just fine / cool. Honestly, when I started playing the Pokemon TCG, these were kind of rotating out. There were some of them around, and I really enjoyed playing with them. And you look at Expanded, they're pretty cool there. I'm looking at the older Lost Zone cards as well. I think they're pretty well designed. In general, there's some fun ones, some kind of silly ones as well. But ultimately, it's a really I'd say well-designed mechanic. And I'll love to hear your thoughts in the comment section, because I think this is mechanics cool, but maybe it's not something people want. Tell me, especially in the comment section, if there are mechanics you'd rather see than the Lost Zone, or mechanics that you think in Standard aren't good enough. Cards in Standard you think should use the Lost Zone. For example, there are some ace specs that you can't get back. Some people are like, yeah, they should just use the Lost Zone, and maybe they should have, like they did with the Prism Stars, to balance them out. Those cards are actually ace specs. And instead of ace specs, what if they just brought back Prism Stars, which could be a little more interesting. Because right now, Unfair Stamp, I think, is a bit of I wouldn't say a badly designed card, though I wouldn't blame you if you did, but a card that kind of restricts deck building because it's so much better than the other options, and pushes the other ones out because then you're not playing Stamp if you're playing Upper Energy or whatever. So anyways, I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of these cards in the comment section. Also, huge shout outs to my YouTube members for supporting me. But if you want to support my channel, I'd really appreciate it if you like the video. That's just an easy way to do it. And I just, again, really do appreciate it. And also subscribe if you want to see more content, or I guess if you don't want to see more content, also subscribe. But I hope you all enjoyed. And of course, leave any video idea suggestions in the comments. But I hope you all enjoyed. And as always, I'm excited to see you in the next video.